So there's a lot more you can do with table view cells other than just having a single line of text. You can go completely all out and start creating your own table view cells, even using Interface Builder to design them. But there are quite a few things you can do just with a few lines of code, and we're going to take a look at that right now. So I've got an application that's fairly dull right now that just has some titles coming up. If I come out of that just to show you what's actually happening, I'm going to jump into my viewDidLoad method. And I'll see that all I'm really doing here is creating a simple array with 3 strings in it just to give us some text to show there. So the interesting thing is, of course, what's happening in the methods of the UI table view data source that I am using here. I'm doing, not surprisingly, number of rows in section. I'm just returning 3 as a literal. And here, of course, the next one down, starting at line 18, is the important one, the table view : cell for row at index path. This is the method that is called, in this case, 3 times, 1 for every row. We're starting off by doing the DQ reusable cell with identifier call. This is just good practice. It's best practice for doing it. And then we're creating a cell. But this stuff is not really what's interesting. So I've got a few things commented out. I'm going to expand the window just so we can see a bit more of this. And all that I'm really doing at this point, not surprisingly, is on line 42, I am setting the contents of the cell's main text label. So I'm going to show another couple of things you can do. For example, we do have a subtitle text available. And if I even just set this to a literal here, I'm going cell.detail.textlabel.text. Subtitle contents go here. Well, what's that all about? Well, if I save that and run it, it may not look any different whatsoever. The reason for that is that we're currently looking at a certain cell style, and it's the default cell style, which is really just this black text. What I need to do is go back to the part of code where my cell was being created, where I have the initWithStyle call. And if I start deleting a little bit back here, I'm going to leave UI table view cell style open and hit escape. What I'm going to see is I have 5 options. Really, it's telling me 5 options here, but there's really 4 things I can choose from, which is UI table view cell style default, subtitle, value 1, and value 2. I'm going to select subtitle right now, save that and run it. And now what we find is that we get the subtitle displayed. It's actually doing a little more than that. Whether it's noticeable or not, it's also slightly shrinking the size of the main black text. But this one's very commonly seen in, say, iPod applications, that kind of thing. So what else can we do? Well, here I'm going to uncomment another block of code that is going to retrieve an image. Now this image I already have actually positioned in my resources folder. It's just called cellimage.png. It's 44 pixels by 44 pixels, which is the default height of a UI table view cell. And it's a very, very common size, is the 44 by 44. That's kind of Apple's guidelines for the average best size for a finger touch. So that cellimage.png already exists there. What's happening is on line 34, I'm creating a string with a path to that image. And of course, I'm doing the path to an image that will be bundled up into my application. So I have to use this rather strange way of getting to it using nsbundle main bundle, path for resource, cell image of type PNG. That then gives me a string which I can use to create a UI image object with the contents of that file. Once that's done, on line 38, I can reach into the cell and set its image property to the UI image object that's just been created. So I'll save that and run that. And now we start making this cell a little bit more interesting, that it has its own image that it can position beside it. One of the things that we'd have to be a little bit careful of, if I decided to change my cell style back to the default, is that when we add an image to the left, it can squeeze our text a little bit. So when I was just showing text, all that text was showing up on the second row, and now it's not because we're squeezing a bit of the image in. So something to be aware of in terms of the data that you're presenting. And while the image goes on the left by default, you can also affect what's going on the right. Now, very commonly, what that's used for is something called the accessory type. The accessory type, well, I'll show you what I mean by that. It's a strange name if you haven't come across it before. But I am setting my cell.accessoryType property to a wonderfully named UI table view cell accessory disclosure indicator. I'm going to save that and run it. And we're basically getting the little gray arrow on there. Now, you've probably seen this a lot. One of the things to be aware of here is that this accessory position, you can have a couple of different things there. And if I quit out of that, not surprisingly, if I come back over here and going to delete everything after table view cell accessory and hit escape again, and I can see what my available options are. By default, it's actually set to UI table view cell accessory none, but we can have disclosure indicator, detailed disclosure button, and check mark. Now, detailed disclosure button, if I save that and run that one, will give you the blue one. Now, bear in mind that you really want to be reading the human interface guidelines when you start to use these things, because a lot of people pick the disclosure buttons and the detailed disclosure button as if they're identical and it's just an aesthetic choice, and it's really not. They're meant to mean two separate things. So again, make sure you're paying attention to the human interface guidelines that Apple publish. Now, what you might be thinking at this point is, well, can we actually start to use that? If I was using, for example, the UI table view cell accessory disclosure indicator, you may be used to seeing that and thinking, okay, that becomes clickable then. Well, while this row is selectable, you might be expecting it to shoot off to the left and bring in a new view on the right. Now, when you use applications where it seems to be drilling down from one part of a table view to another, if you're thinking that that's a nested table view or a table view with multiple levels, it's really not. You're actually going from one view to a completely different view. It just looks like it's a nested control. The complexity of any application is tying one table view in with more table views and other elements like buttons and navigation controls. And we're going to get into that as we get into the idea of multi-view applications. But you can see just in a few basic lines of code how we can start to affect the image and disclosure buttons and subtitles and text on a table view cell. And if you want to take it even further than that, you can even create your very own table view cells where you specify exactly what the full layout of those things are.